175 pounds. And that's not big enough in some cases. So I got to thinking, wow, we have this great Western medical system, so we think, yet people get fatter, sicker, and we continue to utilize health care resources to the point where we're not going to be able to afford it. So, 2016 to 2018, I did an integrative medicine fellowship with Andy Weil down at the University of Arizona, retired from interventional radiology in June of this year, and said, you know what? There's a better way. Prevention. What are we all taught in our country? We are taught to believe that our medical system is going to take care of you when you're sick, right? I want to flip that to the other side of the coin. I want you to believe that health is within each and every one of you, and you don't need the Western medical system to become healthy. Because I'll tell you this, we are not making people healthy. We're managing disease, but year after year, people die of more heart attacks. We have more cancer deaths now than we've ever had in our history. And I just looked at cancer statistics. So 2015, we had 580,000 cancer deaths. If anybody watches TV and you see the ads for Optiva, Keytruda, you think it cures everything, don't you? 2018, we now have 609,000 cancer deaths. We have more deaths now than we had 5 years ago. We're also spending much more money. 1995, for every life year saved with cancer treatment, $50,000 it cost. 2015, that number is now $225,000. We're spending inordinate amounts of money and not getting the results that we should expect. So believe in yourself. Believe in your ability to heal yourself. Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine.
The Bible says, physician, heal thyself.
And everyone has the ability to heal yourself. Your body wants to heal itself naturally. We have a natural homeostatic mechanism built for healing. We just have to give it the right ingredients. And that's what we don't do in this country. Oh, about 20 years ago, I had a patient, and we treated him for problems with his blood vessels in his leg. He'd walk and his legs would cramp and it'd hurt and he'd have to sit down. Put stents in and we think we're really good. We put these beautiful metal stents in, everything looks good. Comes back a year later with the same problem. Only he's 100 pounds heavier a year later. I said, Joe, what happened? I don't know, Doc, I gained all this weight. I said, what do you drink? He says, Pepsi. What's my next question? Why? How many do you drink a day? 12 20-ounce Pepsis. Do you know how many calories are in 12 20-ounce Pepsis? 3,000 calories a day of sugar. 1 year, 100 pounds. Yeah, that's what we're doing to ourselves. So, I want every one of you to take away from this. You can believe that you can change your health. You can change how you feel, and you can change how long you live. We're going to talk about sugar. Is health only sugar? Absolutely not. As Dr. Peskin, who visits here a couple times a year, he talks about oils. That goes along with health and ill health in this country as well. We could talk about numerous things: exercise, stress management, sleep, relationships, spirituality. We're going to talk about sugar tonight. So our objectives are to review the negative consequences of a high sugar diet. And believe me, our country is a high sugar diet. Particularly the correlation between sugar consumption and the incidence of obesity and chronic diseases, including metabolic syndrome, which will define cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, dementia. Understand how to prevent and reverse the chronic metabolic consequences of this overconsumption. So we're going to show the problem but we got to give the solution too. So here's a little quiz. Didn't know you were having a quiz tonight, did you? Sugar is just empty calories, true or false? False. They are calories that are detrimental to your health. They are negative calories. They're not just empty calories. And that's what the food industry wants us to believe. A little sugar is no big deal. When you look at advertisements back in the 60s and 70s, sugar was considered a health food. Instant energy. Okay, that's great if you're running a marathon, but if you're sitting behind a desk, all it does is store it as fat. Number 2, sugar, not saturated fat and cholesterol, cause heart disease. True. True. We've been led to believe that cholesterol is the culprit. That is complete fiction. Sugar may be more addictive than cocaine. Yeah, there's some really, really interesting rodent experiments that show that. Artificial sweeteners will help you lose weight and are a good replacement for sugar. Wow, you guys are really sophisticated. Excellent. Yes. When artificial sweeteners first came out, it was like, oh, we've got the holy grail to weight loss. You can have your cake and eat it too. Not true. Fruit juice is healthier than soda. False. Sugar is sugar. Drinks made with, quote, natural sugar are better for you than those made with high fructose corn syrup. Yeah, that's really false. And what's happening right now is that the beverage industry is taking this whole attack on high fructose corn syrup, and they're now saying, oh, we don't put high fructose corn syrup in our drink. We use, quote, natural sugar. So we put this natural label on it, and immediately what people think is, oh, that's got to be good for you. Nature made it. Complete nonsense. So what do these diseases have in common? Obesity, coronary artery disease, stroke, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, asthma, gastric reflux, celiac disease, and the list goes on. This is a wide array of diseases. What could all of these have in common? Okay, you're at a sugar talk, good answer. But here's the... They're all chronic inflammatory diseases. They all have a very common pathway of inflammation. So inflammation, when you smash your finger with a hammer and your finger turns red, that is acute inflammation. You have cells going there to repair the damage. The problem is when we eat poorly, sugar, adulterated oils, too many carbohydrates, we get this chronic low-grade inflammatory reaction in our body that causes damage to our cells. So inflammation is the cause of all those diseases. And it's really because of our poor food supply, particularly the overconsumption of refined carbohydrates and sugar. Most of these diseases can be prevented. That list of diseases, 80% of those people who get those diseases, it's preventable. And that's the sad part in our country. So what happened? 2.5 million years ago, our Paleolithic ancestors, those are the dudes running around hunting and gathering and running from saber-toothed tigers and whatever they did. They were eaters of opportunity. They ate when they could find food, and they didn't eat when they couldn't. We think they ate a variety of foods. So they ate root vegetables, nuts, seeds, meat. There's lots of different theories on Paleolithic man. But what they didn't have was a steady source of sugar. They might find honey or sweet berries only a few times of the year. They had virtually no sugar consumption. 10,000 years ago, what happened? We learned how to cultivate grains. So we took wild grasses, we crossbred them with other things, and we end up with corn and wheat and soybeans and all these other things. So those are all really came from grasses. This was great for society because now we could grow food, we could settle down, we could build civilizations. Probably wasn't so great for our health. So when you look at Neanderthal man, who was a hunter-gatherer, on average they were 4 inches taller and about 50 pounds heavier than our agrarian society relatives. So we lost some nutritional value when we started with grains. So the problem is evolution is a very, very slow process. Changing our genetic makeup is slow. Now, changing our epigenetic makeup, which I may define later, is very fast. But it takes generations, hundreds or thousands of generations to change. Our current food supply is at complete odds with our genetic makeup. We are really still hunter-gatherers. Problem is, we can hunt and gather 24/7, 365. Our modern food sources and their nutritional components are very different from our genetic makeup, and that's a huge problem. S.B. Eaton. So S.B. Eaton, interestingly, is a radiologist from Emory University. And he wrote several articles in New England Journal of Medicine, but the big problem is our modern food supply is at odds with our genetic makeup. And this is the cause of much of our modern disease. And that's absolutely true. If you go to traditional hunter-gatherer societies around the world, and there are very, very few anymore, whether they're vegetarian or whether they're meat eaters, they have several things in common. Number one, they're not fat. Number two, they're active. Number three, they live well. Number four, they never get cancer, strokes, heart disease, dementia, or any of these chronic diseases. They typically die of infectious disease or they die of accidents. So the problem with today's foods, too much sugar. And we're going to talk about sugar. We're going to talk about the molecular chemistry of sugar a little bit. And fructose is the bad actor here. Too many carbohydrates. Oh my God. I mean, if you look at the food pyramid back in the 90s, they had you eating 6 to 11 servings of grains a day. Can you imagine that? I mean, no wonder we gain weight. Too many manufactured foods. If you could look at all of the additives in foods, you would fall over. There's literally hundreds of different additives and chemicals put in foods. Too little natural fats, protein, and essential vitamins and minerals. That's the problem. So currently there are 30% more obese than undernourished people worldwide. If you went back into the 90s with all the famines, that was completely opposite. More people died from undernourishment than overnourishment. Now it's just the opposite. More people are dying from obesity-related disease than dying from starvation in this world. There are 366 million diabetics worldwide. That's 5% of the population. Anybody know where diabetes is increasing the fastest? China. China. They have an enormous problem with diabetes. Enormous. Now, that's 5% of the world. Anybody know what percent of our country has diabetes?
75%.
Oh, God, no. 12%. 12%. Here's the thing. It's predicted by the year 2050, that's only 31 years from now, there'll be 100 million Americans with diabetes. That's 30% of the population. That is an economic and public health disaster. It costs, if somebody's diagnosed with diabetes in their 40s, an insurance company can expect to pay several $1 million in health care costs over the lifetime of that patient. Yes, sir?
What did you say the percentage is now?
About 12%. I have a slide with that. Yeah. So these are the latest statistics on obesity. In kids, 2015, 16, 18.5% of children under 18 are obese. In Iowa, we're number 10 in the country, we're the 10th worst in the country. About 19% of our kids are obese. The incidence in cancer is expected to go up by 75% in just 12 years, 11 years. Yeah, it's not going down. And that's why I laugh at Tim. He said, well, how are you going to stay in business? It's going to take multiple generations to put me out of business. And I'm not going to live that long. Cancer is associated with obesity. This one I really want to highlight because we all know overweight and obesity is associated with heart disease. We all know that it's associated with what's called metabolic syndrome. Many of us know that it's associated with dementia. But cancer, it's estimated a third of cancers are obesity related. And those cancers include thyroid, colon, endometrial, esophagus, pancreas, postmenopausal breast, renal, ovarian, early and aggressive prostate and gallbladder. That's a pretty long list of cancers associated with being overweight and obesity. There's an increased incidence of dementia with obesity, and I'll show a slide on that. I don't know why these slides are like that. Probably because I made it on a Mac and I'm on a, or no, I made it on a Power HP, but it's on a Mac. Anyway, deaths from cancer projected to increase, or deaths from cardiovascular disease projected to increase by 128% between 2000 and 2050. Last year at the American Heart Association meeting, the president of the American Heart Association said, I have no idea how we're going to take care of all these people. 2017, there were 30.2 million adults, 12.2% of the population with diabetes, and that's tripled over the last 30 years. In 1970, we had 2.2 million diabetics in this country. Yeah. 39.8% of American adults are obese, defined as a BMI greater than 30. 31%, 33% are overweight. New statistics. In Iowa, we are the 4th most obese state in the country. 3 states ahead of us are Oklahoma, Mississippi, and West Virginia. Not a statistic to be proud of. Diagnosed diabetes in 2012 cost this country $245 billion. That's up 45% in just 5 years. And that continues to skyrocket. Why? We have more diabetes, we have people living longer with diabetes, and the diabetes drugs keep costing more money. Yeah. Projected by 2030, 11 years, 95% of us will be, or 42% of us will be obese. We're getting pretty close already. So we talked about overweight, we talked about obesity, but what I really, really want to drill down on is the consequences of that, and that's metabolic syndrome. These are the health consequences of being overweight or obese and eating our current diet. So how do we define metabolic syndrome? There's a laboratory definition where we can talk about HDL and waist circumference and lipids and all that, but what I really want you to understand is metabolic syndrome is a cluster of disease states that all are driven by a very similar phenomenon, and that's overweight. Heart disease, lipid problems, blood fat problems, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, dementia, cancer, something in women called polycystic ovary disease, one of the leading causes of infertility. And then the last one is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That is fat being stored in our liver. Used to be relatively uncommon. It's now the most common reason for liver transplant. It's ahead of hepatitis C, it's ahead of alcoholic liver disease. Why? Sugar. And I'll show you why. 75% of those diseases our healthcare dollars are spent taking care of. So the question is, does obesity equal metabolic syndrome? Can you have metabolic syndrome without being obese? And the answer is yes. So, NANES, which is National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, the government has been doing nutrition surveys for decades. Beautiful information that shows trends in what we're eating and how we're becoming. So what they did is there was a group of scientists that looked at the NANES data between 2005 and 2012. They found at that time there were 34% obese adults, 83 million people. 71% of those were metabolically abnormal, meaning they were either had or on their way to metabolic syndrome. If we looked at people overweight, defined as a BMI of 25 to 29.9, an additional 53% were metabolically abnormal. But here's the scary thing. If we looked at normal weight people, BMIs 19 to 25, 30% of those people were metabolically abnormal. So just because you're thin doesn't mean you're immune to metabolic syndrome. We call it the skinny fat. They're skinny on the outside, but fat on the inside. A lot of those are the teenagers drinking 3 or 4 Mountain Dews a day. They're young, they're metabolically active, they can get away with it, but not for long. So the total risk for metabolic syndrome, 126 million people. It's even higher now because we have even a greater obesity rate. We've always been taught by our nutritionists, by our scientists, a calorie is a calorie. Doesn't make any difference whether it comes from sugar or olive oil. Well, in terms of food intake, a calorie burned is a calorie burned. So if you're out exercising, you're burning calories, doesn't make any difference where it came from. But a calorie eaten is not a calorie eaten. So if you eat a calorie of sugar or you eat a calorie of olive oil, they're handled completely differently in your body because of all these neurohormones that are telling you either to store fat or burn fat. And we're going to talk about that. So it's really the quality of what we eat that determines the quantity we eat. Am I full or am I not full? And it also determines the desire to burn it or store it. Sugar tells our body to store it. Olive oil, protein tells our body to burn it. So it's all about the quality of the calorie, not necessarily the quantity. So what happened with our caloric consumption? Well, between 1977 and 2000, it increased 187 calories per day in men and 335 calories per day in women. Now, if that was in the form of kale and broccoli and carrots, no big deal. But it wasn't. It was in the form of sugary drinks and refined carbohydrates. Big deal. The other part of this slide, let's see if I... All right, the bottom part of that slide says that between 2000 and 2010, our caloric intake did not change, okay? We remained stable. Thank God for that. But if you look at the waist circumference data in that same period, we all gained about 0.37 inches per year on our waistline. How can that be? How can that be? Calories cause us to get fat. No, the quality of the calories can cause us to get fat. What happened was, despite the fact that we didn't increase our caloric intake, we continued to consume more carbs, more sugar, less natural fats, and protein. And we continued to gain weight. This is kind of one of my favorite little things to talk about. How did we get into this mess? What happened? What happened? A lot of you here are old enough to remember Richard Nixon. He was, well, we'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to comment. But he was trying to get reelected. And so his Secretary of Agriculture was Earl Butz. And he said to Earl, we got to stabilize farm prices. So then we got subsidies. So we subsidized all these row crops, corn, wheat, soybeans, cotton. Made food cheap. Made it plentiful. So if we look back at what we used to spend on food back in the 50s and 60s, the average American spent about 16% of their income on food. Fast forward now, we spend about 8% on food. So we got food, lots of it, and really cheap. If you look at what we used to spend on health insurance, about 5% of our income, now 20% of our income. We've flipped that. And that's just a stark example of the disaster that's happened. Here's what else happened. 1966, high fructose corn syrup is invented in Japan. It's the Japanese way of getting back at us for Hiroshima. 1975, it's introduced into the food system in this country. Here's the problem. It was cheap. Compared to sugar, it was cheap. So food companies started using this like wild. And we had no idea what the metabolic effects of this were. Here's the real problem. 1977, George McGovern gets together the Select Committee for Nutrition and Human Needs for the United States. And instead of doing it in a scientific manner, he got 3 nutritionists from Harvard, Stemler, Stair, and Hegsted, to write nutritional needs for Americans. Well, at that time, low fat was in. Baby, fat was a killer, carbohydrates were a lifesaver. So we got the low-fat diet. The greatest public health disaster in the last 100 years. It's a disaster. It's an experiment. It's an uncontrolled experiment that we've done for the last 50 years, and it's an utter disaster. Yeah. So it just came out a couple of years ago in the New York Times. All three of those nutritionists were paid tens of thousands of dollars by, guess who? The sugar industry, to write those recommendations. So if you think our government has any interest in making you healthy, think again. Their only interest is big ag, big pharma, food and beverage. So here's what we did. So the graph, the little dotted line, that's the prevalence of obesity. The little bars are our carbohydrate intake. Look what happened. We were real steady, 1960 to 1980. We then get the low-fat recommendation in the late 70s, and guess what takes off? Prevalence of obesity and our consumption of carbohydrates. You think that's a coincidence? Nope. Here's what happened to fat. We said, oh, we got to eat less fat. So we did. We went from about 33, 34% fat calories, and we went down into the upper 20s. But look what our obesity rate did. Skyrocketed. Eating fat does not make you fat. Now, eating processed, manufactured fat in our food system is not good for you. When I talk about fats, that's natural fat that comes from meat, that comes from nuts, that comes from things like avocados, that comes from, good fats, olive oil. What happened with our sugar consumption? Well, if you look back, it was estimated back in the 1980s we probably ate maybe 2 to 4 pounds of sugar a year. Not very much. And that was true even in the early 1900s. It went up a little bit. Maybe we ate about 20 pounds of processed sugar every year in the early 1900s. And when I say sugar, I'm not referring to sugar in natural fruits and vegetables. I'm referring to added processed sugar. Look what happened in the late 90s and 2000. Sugar consumption skyrocketed, particularly with the introduction of high fructose corn syrup. Anybody know how many pounds of sugar it's estimated the average American consumes per year now? 150. Around 150 pounds of added sugar. Now, who remembers these babies? The Snackwells, huh? That little throwback there. So these were this is a health food, right? This was considered healthy. Because what did we do? We took the fat out of the food, thank God for that, it's going to save us all, and we replaced it with sugar. So we took out 2 grams of fat. 1 gram of fat has 9 calories. 1 gram of sugar only has 4 calories. Well, that makes logical sense, right? If we can replace it with something that has half the caloric output, it's got to be good for us. The problem is we replaced 2 grams of fat with 13 grams of carbs, 4 of which were sugar. That gave us a positive 34 calories in those cookies. But it wasn't fat, so it must be okay. Must be okay. We're now paying the price. Let's look at Coca-Cola. You know, Coke makes everybody happy, right? Let the world be happy, give them a Coke. Well, not so much. Each 12-ounce can has 150 calories. It's all sugar. If you take that 150 calories and multiply it by 365 days a year, divide it by 3,500 calories per pound, that's somewhat controversial, but close enough, you could expect to gain around 15 pounds a year. That's with one Coca-Cola 12-ounce. Do they even make 12-ounce Cokes anymore? I mean, it's 20 ounces or 44 ounces or whatever it is. The average American is now consuming 150 to 170 pounds of this stuff per year. 45 to 50% of consumption of all added sugar comes from where? Beverages. Beverages. Yep. And then the other thing we were taught is if you're overweight, it's your own fault. You're a glutton or you're a sloth. And so what did we do? We laid obesity on individual responsibility. quit eating as much and go exercise more. And that was absolutely 100% wrong. Weight gain is a hormonal problem that's beyond your conscious control. And there's several things I want to point out to believe that that's true. Number one, do you know any kids that choose to be obese? No. Who's the first one in the school to get picked on? The fat kid. They make fun of him. They pull his hair. They take his coat because he can't run after him, whatever it is. There was an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The quality of life in an obese child is equivalent to a kid on chemotherapy. They're miserable. They're social outcasts. Kids do not choose to be obese. Our food system has made them obese. Obesity and overweight, metabolic syndrome, this is a worldwide problem now. We've exported all of our food system and obesity problem to the entire world. The entire world. The poor are disproportionately affected. There is no question that the lower your social economic status, the more risk you have for obesity and metabolic syndrome. Why? Because those people have no access to fresh, whole foods. Food desert, defined as living farther than 1 mile from a store that has fresh food. So if you live in a food desert, you're dependent on Quick Trip for your meals. And I've never been to a Quick Trip that I'd eat anything at. Michael Pollan, anybody know who Michael Pollan is? Food writer, Berkeley. He has some great sayings, but one is, never buy your food where you buy your fuel. Okay, remember that. Remember that. Here's another thing. Even our animals raised in captivity have exhibited increased body weight over the last 20 years. Why? Because they're eating the same things we are. GMO grains. They even feed cattle candy that's been rejected from the candy factory. Yes, there was a case up in Minnesota. Semi driving down the road, had an accident. Skittles everywhere. Guess where that guy was going? To the feed lot to put Skittles in with their feed. Because they'll gain weight faster. Sugar will make them gain weight like wild. Foie gras, duck liver pate. Anybody know how we make big livers in ducks? We jam a tube down their throat and pump them full of sugar and grains. It'll make a liver fat like that. Yeah. There's an epidemic of 6-month-old obese kids. Dr. Robert Lustig out at University of California, San Francisco is a pediatric endocrinologist. He has an entire clinic of obese 6-month-olds. Why? Because the formula we're feeding these kids has more sugar than a Coca-Cola. Yes, yes. Wow. Wow. All right, so what's happening?
Breastfeed them?
What's that?
Is it better to breastfeed?
It is absolutely better to breastfeed them. Mother Nature did everything for us. Our food system is so arrogant they think that they can do better than Mother Nature. Not a chance in the world. Not a chance in the world. Breastfeed. Every child should be breastfed for a minimum of 6 months, preferably up to 2 years. Yeah. Breastfeeding. It's free, right? It's free. And that's the cool thing about a lot of these things that we can talk about is they're free. Breastfeeding is free. Exercise is free. Meditation is free. All these things are free that will help our health. Now, food isn't free, and yep, you might have to spend a little more on good food, but there's a really good reason why. So, what's happening? Greater food availability. Do we just have more food around? The answer is no. We had plenty of food in the 50s and 60s. Nobody was starving. Or is it disruption in our hormonal negative feedback system that controls our energy? That's the problem. That's the problem. And that takes the guilt out of gaining weight when I explain it on a hormonal basis. So what is behavior? I want to define behavior because eating is a behavior. It's a stereotype response to a physiologic stimulus. So we all know that. You know what? I shock you with an electric prod, you run the other way. I bring the electric prod out, you don't even have to be shocked, you're already running the other way. That's behavior. But there's a corollary to behavior. All behavior is the sum output of our genetic, hormonal, and biochemical inputs to the central nervous system that creates drives. And the food industry has capitalized on our neurotransmitters and biochemistry to the max. They have addicted us to food. And I've got a whole nother talk about food addiction, so we're not going to get into that. But believe me, they've addicted us. So, do you think you have the willpower to ignore these internal hormonal signals 24/7, 365? Probably not. Probably not. So I do have to talk about a few hormones. I don't want to get too technical, but we want to talk about some of the hormones that help regulate our energy balance and eating habits. One is leptin. So this was discovered in 1996. It's a hormone produced by fat cells. As that hormone is produced, it goes to our brain. It tells our brain, stop eating, you have enough energy on board. Stop. But our leptin signaling has been disrupted, and I'll show you how. Ghrelin. Ghrelin is produced in our stomach. It's the hormone that says, I'm hungry. Your stomach growls. You get up in the morning, you're hungry. That's ghrelin. As soon as you eat, that goes away and you're satiated. Insulin. Everybody knows insulin is essential for getting blood glucose into our cells to utilize as energy. But we have way too much insulin swimming around in our bodies, and it's disrupting many, many processes. Because insulin is also telling our body to, guess what? Store energy. Store energy as fat. So if we have too much insulin, we have too much energy storage. And I'm going to show you how we can get insulin down. Norepinephrine, that's our fight or flight hormone that comes from our adrenal glands, these little glands that sit on top of our kidneys. That stimulates glucose response. Cortisol, that's our stress hormone. That's also produced by the adrenal glands. Stress is essential for life in very small doses. Our problem now in our society is we have stress 24/7, 365. We have too much going on. What am I going to do with the kids? My husband hates me, my job sucks, and we're stressed. And we don't manage stress well. And there's really simple ways to manage stress. But cortisol leads to poor eating habits. It stimulates our appetite, particularly for, guess what? Sugar. Yeah. When you haven't slept for 24 hours and you're stressed, you think you're going to the refrigerator for a carrot stick? Nope. You're going to Dunkin' Donuts for a donut. That's what cortisol does. It's not your willpower, it's your hormones. And then there's another peptide or another protein called peptide YY. It's produced by our distal small bowel and our colon. The importance of that is that's our satiety hormone. So when we get done with a meal and you feel full, that's peptide YY signaling in your brain. Problem is it takes 20 minutes to get that signal. So if you wolf your dinner down in 5 minutes, you don't get that signal and you're going back for seconds. It's an important hormone. There's dozens of others, but that gets way too complicated. So just a little schematic diagram, and I'm going to make this really simple. So we have a fat cell. It produces leptin. Leptin goes to our brain to this little peanut-sized gland in our brain called the hypothalamus. It's supposed to signal the hypothalamus, I'm full. But if we have too much insulin running around, insulin blocks that signaling. And now our brain doesn't see the signal of fullness, energy is enough, and it says we're hungry. So we eat more. And the process goes on and on and on. You cannot consciously override this system. The only way to override this system is decrease your insulin levels. Guess what spikes insulin the most? Carbohydrates. Actually, it's not sugar. It's actually white bread. White bread will spike your blood glucose faster than sugar. But sugar and refined carbs make that insulin spike go wild. Fat barely raises insulin. Proteins can raise insulin variable levels, but not nearly the level of carbs. Now, everybody's individual as well, so there's individual variations. But in general, that's what happens. So the average person today has twice the amount of insulin they did 30 years ago. We're all consuming way too many insulin-spiking carbohydrates. Added consumption of sugar, we're addicted. Too much insulin. So let's talk a little bit about the biochemistry of sugar. And this is important, and if you ever come and hear Dr. Peskin, he's all about biochemistry and physiology. I'm going back to the biochemistry to explain everything that happens. So sucrose, which is the table sugar and added sugar, is one molecule of glucose. Glucose is essential for life. You can't live without it. If you don't get glucose in your diet, your liver makes it. Glucose is essential. Fructose, that's the thing that makes sugar sweet. That's what makes fruit sweet. There is not one biochemical reaction in our body that requires fructose. You can live without fructose. Why is insulin a problem? Well, we have two body compartments, our lean body mass, organs and muscle, and our fat. Every calorie consumed is either stored as fat or burned as energy. First law of thermodynamics says energy can't be created or energy is constant within a given environment. So we either store it or we burn it. What determines which compartment gets energy? Insulin. If our insulin levels are low, our hormone signaling is telling us to burn energy. If our insulin levels are high, it's telling us to store more energy. And here's where we store it, right there. This is just the molecular structure. Glucose essential for life, fructose a non-essential element for life. Fructose is poison. At the doses we are consuming sugar and fructose, it's a toxin. So what happened with fructose consumption? Well, when we just ate natural fruits and vegetables, we were getting about 15 grams a day. Really easy for our liver to process because we were getting it in very, very small doses. Fast forward to today, some adolescents are eating and drinking up to 73 grams of fructose a day. That is an enormous amount of fructose. And we're going to talk about what happens with it. So this is what we did to our food supply. We added fructose as sugar, high fructose corn syrup, by the ton. What it does in food is it improves palatability. So if you take the fat out of food, what's it taste like? Cardboard. You might as well eat the box. It has more fiber. So they had to add something to make it palatable. Sugar. It also is a browning agent. So when you slather barbecue sauce on your ribs, throw them on the grill and those ribs get crispy brown, that's not the meat. That's the sugar in the barbecue sauce. It's called the Maillard reaction. It's a browning reaction. And what's happening is it's attaching sugar molecules to the ends of proteins, causing them to brown. Well, guess what? That same reaction is happening in our bodies. We're browning from the inside out. And that's not a good thing. Fiber. We took the fiber out of food. Why would we do that? Fiber is one of nature's most precious commodities. Shelf life, and it allows freezing. Yeah, it increases shelf life. So it's all about shelf life in food. I mean, the shelf life of a Twinkie is what? 10 years, 20 years? I don't know. I mean, they never, yes, sir?
Why would the removal of fiber increase shelf life?
I don't know the science behind it, but it does. And they took it out. So yeah, this is interesting. So if you go on YouTube or one of those things, they have two plates. One of them is fresh fruits and vegetables, and one of them is a McDonald's Happy Meal. And they do time-lapse photography over time. Within 2 days, the fruit and vegetables, they look awful. They're brown and shriveled up. The McDonald's Happy Meal, you can't tell the difference for those 2 weeks. Looks just as good 2 weeks ago as it did the day they bought it. Yeah, preservatives, chemicals, food additives. These are all neurotoxins. And then this is the real disaster. We took natural fats and we chemically altered them. We took them, put them under high pressure, jammed hydrogen ions into them, hydrogen molecules into them, and we got trans fats. So most fats, if you know chemistry, there's the cis configuration and the trans configuration. Most fats that are good for us and work physiologically in our body are in the cis configuration. But our chemical industry took them and made them into the trans. Our cells have no idea what to do with these. They don't know what to do with them. They disrupt cellular signaling mechanisms. They get incorporated into our cell membranes. Our membrane proteins don't work right, and we get sick. Trans fats are supposed to be out of our food system by the end of last year. I don't think that's happened, but here's the problem. The food industry is now using esterized fats and all different other configurations. So they're still manipulating fats, and they're all in processed foods, and they're no good. So here's what we ended up with. A freezer full of convenient food, but a waistline that's not so good. Now you might ask, is it the leading cause of obesity? And the answer is no. It is a contributor to obesity, but this was a study done in 2011 by Dr. Mazafarian. At that time he was at Harvard, he's now at Tufts. But what they looked at is what causes the most weight gain. And you can see on top, there they are, potato chips and French fries. Why? Well, there's starch and processed fat, that's not good, and you can't just eat one, can you? We don't eat a little bag of chips, we eat a big bag of chips. We don't eat a little pouch of fries, we eat a bucket of fries. Real problem. But if you look at things that cause weight loss, look at this one, nuts. How many have been told to limit your consumption of nuts because they have too many calories? Nuts are one of the best sources of nutrition that we have. Calories make no difference. It's the quality of the calorie, not the quantity. Sweetened beverages, big problem. Okay? What about dairy? You know, we've all been told, oh, God, eat low-fat dairy. So if we eat low-fat dairy, what do they put in the dairy to make it palatable? Yeah, sugar. Sugar. Look at this. Sweetened beverages, weight gain. 100% fruit juice, weight gain. Low-fat or skim milk, weight gain, minor. Whole milk, maybe even a little weight loss. Yeah. Dairy fat is actually very healthy. There's something called CLA, conjugated linolenic acid in dairy, that appears to be cardioprotective. It protects us against heart attacks. I'm not going to get into dairy because there's lots of nuances, but if you're going to eat dairy, eat full-fat dairy, and only buy your dairy from pasture-raised cows that have not been fed hormones and antibiotics. That's my spiel on dairy. So, metabolic syndrome, it's all about sugar, particularly the fructose molecule. Sugar is the only one factor in obesity which we saw. Chronic fructose exposure is what is driving metabolic syndrome. So we have obesity related to carbohydrates, lots of carbohydrates, some sugar, but we have metabolic syndrome, which is purely driven by fructose. Purely driven by fructose, which is sugar. Now, before your eyes glaze over here, you're like, what the hell is this? We're going to simplify it. I want to do this. This is the biochemistry. So if Dr. Peskin was here, he'd probably be really proud of me to put in a biochemical slide. But this is what happens with glucose. So remember, glucose is essential for life. It's one of the two molecules in sugar. Fructose is the other one. What happens with glucose, when we eat a load of glucose, 80% of it goes to our peripheral tissues for energy. Brain, so our biggest consumer of energy by weight is our brain, by far. Muscles, heart, etc., etc. 20% goes to the liver. Most of the glucose that goes to the liver is processed and stored, if it's not being burned, as a substance called glycogen. So we take these glucose molecules, they hook them up in these really long chains, and we store that for future energy needs in our liver and in our muscle. But glycogen is a limited energy source. We only store about 1,200 to 1,500 calories of glycogen, and then we're full. If we eat too much glucose, and we've already tapped out our glycogen stores, we're not burning enough energy, some of that glucose will be stored as fat. It's packaged up by the liver as fat molecules, and it's shipped out to our body to store. But only about 2% in the average person. So a minimum amount of fat storage for glucose. Now, here's everybody's favorite carbohydrate, ethanol, alcohol. Okay? Alcohol passively diffuses into the liver. 20% goes to our peripheral tissues, our brain, hence we get drunk. Okay? But 80% goes to our liver to be processed. You can see our first step in processing is something called acetaldehyde. anything with aldehyde is bad for us. Formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, if it ends in aldehyde, it's not good. So that's immediately converted to something called acetate. That alcohol then goes into these little powerhouses in our cells called mitochondria. The mitochondria create energy out of the alcohol, but then the leftover, called citrate, pops out of the mitochondria, and guess what? It's converted to fat. So we now have alcohol, 80% of that is being converted to fat. If we're not burning that fat as energy, it's getting stored. It's getting stored in our liver. It's getting stored in our muscles. It's getting stored in our bellies. It's causing us to not be able to utilize insulin, so it's causing insulin resistance. This is leading to what we still call alcoholic fatty liver disease. That means fat stored in the liver because of alcohol. Now, let's look at fructose. This gets even more complicated, but the bottom line here is, remember we talked about metabolic syndrome. High blood pressure, abnormal waist circumference, abnormal insulin resistance, okay? Abnormal fats in our blood. This one slide explains every one of those things. So what happens with fructose is it goes through all these different reactions. That pyruvate goes into the mitochondria makes some energy, citrate comes out, and it's then converted to fat. Well, we can't burn fructose very easily. So any given time, 13 to maybe even 20% of fructose is now being converted to fat. So if you're eating 75 grams of fructose a day, 20 to 30% of that's being converted to fat. Yeah, we get fat because we're drinking all this fructose. So that's transported out to our peripheral tissues for storage. It's stored in the liver. It causes insulin resistance, hence the diabetes. There's some byproducts up top there with fructose metabolism that increases our uric acid. How many of you have gout? Anybody have gout? That's a uric acid problem. You want to get rid of gout? Get rid of sugar and carbs. It's always, we said, oh, it's too much protein. Nonsense. It's all about the fructose. It's also causing our blood vessels to constrict. Hypertension. Hypertension. So in one slide, fructose metabolism, we've explained metabolic syndrome. This is a comparison. Chronic ethanol exposure, chronic fructose exposure. They both cause high blood pressure. They both cause heart disease. Alcohol causes a heart disease called cardiomyopathy. That's where the alcohol is toxic to the actual muscle cells. Fructose causes atherosclerosis, hard into the arteries, so we get heart disease because of arterial constriction and heart attacks. They both cause abnormal blood fats, dyslipidemia. They both can cause pancreatitis, an inflammation of our pancreas. They both lead to obesity. They both cause hepatic dysfunction because of fat storage. They can both be detrimental to our fetus. Alcohol causes fetal alcohol syndrome. It passively diffuses across the placenta and can affect the baby. Fructose causes insulin resistance in our babies. Yeah, insulin resistance in our babies. They're born not really with diabetes, but predisposed to it. They're both addictive. They're both addictive. Fructose or ethanol. At least ethanol, you get a little buzz. All you get with fructose is a big belly. Data estimate that 25% of diabetes is explained by sugar. Probably more. Here's what we consume as far as sugar. So if you look, sodas, energy drinks, and sports drinks account for 35% of our sugar intake. Okay? Another 10% from fruit juices. 45%. 45%. Here's how much sugar's in some of your favorite beverages. Cranberry juice cocktail, 12 teaspoons of sugar. That's more than a Coke. That's more than a Coke. Yeah. Orange juice, almost the same as a Coke, 10 teaspoons of sugar. Orange juice is no better than a Coca-Cola. I was in Hawaii a few years ago, and I'm sorry this doesn't project, but that's okay. So we go to the Mauna Kea, and they have this big breakfast buffet. And they have the American breakfast buffet, and then the traditional Japanese breakfast buffet. So I had to take a picture of this, because what's on our breakfast buffet? Selection of juices, sugar, fruits, sugar, but it's okay. Fruits are okay. Cereals, oh my God, you might as well label them as desserts. loaded with sugar. Breakfast meats, okay. Omelets, I'm good with that. Waffles, are you kidding me? How much syrup are you going to pour on a waffle? Pastries, coffee or tea. And then we get sugar in the form of alcohol too, plus the juice.
You skipped coffee and tea. Is that bad for you?
No, those are great, as long as you don't add sugar to them. Yeah. But look at that breakfast. That is probably 5 days worth of sugar in that breakfast buffet. So then I go to the Japanese one, and it's not on here, but I'll tell you what it is. Broiled salmon, miso soup. Miso soup is fermented soy soup. There's umi, or some type of starch. There was egg. There was not one thing with sugar. Guess which country has the longest life expectancy in the world? Japan. Okinawa Islands are number one. So of the economically developed countries, we have a group of economic countries that get together. There's 31 of them. And that includes many South American countries, European countries, United States. The latest statistic of those 31 countries, we're number 27 in mortality, right behind Cuba. Cuba has almost the identical mortality we do. Now, of all those countries, we spend twice as much as the next highest country on health care. We spend almost 10 times as much as Cuba. Something's not right with this picture. Yeah. So remember this. Processed foods are high in sugar and low in fiber and high in altered fats. Real food, high in fiber, low in sugar. So you can choose the Great American Diet, and we call it the Standard American Diet, SAD, SAD, SAD. Or you can choose to go to your local farmer's market and buy health. Take your pick. You can pay now or you can pay later. So carbs, what happens when we eat them? Well, all non-fibrous carbs are metabolized to glucose. Carbohydrates are sugar. Now, not in the sense that I talked about with sucrose, but all carbohydrates are rapidly converted to glucose, which is a sugar. And we've seen what happens with that glucose. Glucose stimulates insulin secretion. If you're not burning the glucose, then you're storing it as fat. Fructose that's not being used for fuel is also converted to fat. So here's the double whammy on this, though. Well, the more carbohydrates we eat, the higher insulin. The higher insulin, the more fat we store. Fat cannot be burned in chronically high insulin levels. If your insulin levels are up here, you cannot burn fat. That's why a ketogenic diet works really well for fat burning, because there's virtually no carbs. Insulin levels fall. So being fat does not come from eating fat. Being fat comes from an inability to burn fat, which is a direct consequence of relying on carbohydrates for energy. You can live perfectly well with 0 carbohydrates. There are essential fatty acids that we cannot live without, so we can't live without fat. There are essential amino acids which come from protein. We can't live without protein. There are no essential carbohydrates. You can live with a 0 carbohydrate diet. Now, that's going to be kind of a crummy diet. It's not going to be really that good, but you can do it if you wanted to. Go live with the Eskimos. They eat almost virtually no carbs. So some people are going to say, well, what about artificial sweeteners? That's the answer, right? I can have my cake and eat it too. Nope, not the answer. So there's 6 approved in this country: saccharin, sucralose, NutraSweet, Sunette. These are all 500 to 20,000 times sweeter than sugar. So here's what's happening, we think, with artificial sweeteners. We know that consuming liquids that are sweet do not signal our brain in the same way that solid food does. They do not satiate our appetite, and they actually cause us to eat more solid sweets. And we also think that these artificial sweeteners are disrupting the bacteria in our gut, which we are finding are incredibly important for energy homeostasis. Artificial sweeteners. And the other thing is, a lot of these artificial sweeteners, they're all chemicals, and a lot of them have been shown to be neurotoxic in particularly developing brains. So artificial sweeteners are not the answer. It's been shown in, that's interesting. Oh, okay. That was delayed. Okay, so it's been shown that people who eat artificial sweeteners gain weight. They do not result in weight loss. They're not even neutral. Metabolic syndrome may double with artificial sweeteners. There's increased risk of type 2 diabetes. There's increased risk of high blood pressure and coronary artery disease. Artificial sweeteners are not the answer. Go back to water. We've been drinking it for millions of years. So the solution, we want to go back to a plant-based, natural diet. Natural diet. What did our ancestors eat? Well, they ate fruits when they could find them. They ate vegetables. They ate meat. They ate eggs. They ate nuts. They didn't eat grains. Okay? They didn't eat corn for the most part until about 10,000 years ago. So we're led to believe these healthy whole grains, quote unquote, are good for us. They're not. They're not. Number one, a lot of them are GMOs, which I think are problematic. Number two, if we're eating grains that are row crops, they're sprayed with glyphosate. So wheat is sprayed with glyphosate just before harvest. Just before they're harvesting wheat, they spray it. Not to kill bugs or weeds, but to desiccate the seed head so that they get a bigger yield. Yeah, your Cheerios are full of glyphosate. Go to environmentalworkinggroup.org and you can see how much glyphosate's in your grains. Whole grains still stimulate an insulin response, and it's not much different than refined grains. So if we want to lose weight and we want to get a better metabolic profile, we've got to get rid of all these grains out of our diets. And of course, which is on there, avoid all sugar.
Are the grains like quinoa, the old ancient grains, any different?
So, let's separate those a little bit, because when I say grains, corn, wheat, okay, oats, even oats are problematic. Some people will say, okay, what about ancient grains like quinoa? I'm okay with a little quinoa, but again, it's a grain. It causes a blood sugar spike. Yes, sir?
It's really hard to find meats without dextrose.
Yeah.
You got to read that label, and they're just full of sugar.
Yeah.
All your processed.
Everything is full of sugar. So we want to, okay, where do we buy meats? Let's buy pasture-raised meats. We have lots of farmers who are making good pasteurized meat, or pasture-raised meat. Nick Wallace Farms, does a terrific job. Yeah, everything's adulterated. So what about label reading? I put up a label here, and that label shows what we see on our boxes. And so if you'll notice here, we get saturated fat. There's 1 gram in Fruity Pebbles. That's 5% of our recommended daily allowance. So everything has a recommended daily allowance, right? Except sugar. The sugar industry quashed that decades ago. Government wanted to put a recommended daily allowance. The sugar industry was powerful enough to not make that happen. So 9 grams of sugar for most people is a meaningless number. They have no idea what to compare it to. Manipulation. Manipulation. So there's no allowance. Anybody know what the World Health Organization recommends per day for added sugar? 24 grams. That's 6 teaspoons. 6 teaspoons of sugar. And I got a little shopping expedition that's going to show you how quickly 6 teaspoons of sugar comes up. So, what have we been told to do? Eat more carbs and less fat. If your dream is to be so obese you can no longer walk, living in a nursing home, taking dozens of pills, causing multiple side effects with complete loss of cognitive abilities, chronic aches and pains, chest pains, and cancer, then eat all the grains and sugar you want. This is what's happening in our country. I mean, I kind of put this as a little bit of a joke. This is not a joke. Alzheimer's disease affects 5.3 million people right now, and it's climbing rapidly. Okay, diabetes is climbing rapidly. Cancer deaths are at an all-time high. Cardiac disease continues to climb. This is not a joke. This is serious business. And if you think our Western healthcare system is going to get you out of this mess, ain't happening. Isn't happening. You all have to believe you have the power to retake your health, and Mother Nature, for thousands and thousands of years, has provided everything we need. Now, because of the way we process food, because of the way we get food, We're missing some nutrients. We're missing minerals. Our soils are depleted of minerals because of all of the stuff we spray on them. Magnesium, we get about 50% of the magnesium we used to get. Boron, chromium, all these essential minerals are not in our soil anymore. So a mineral supplement is perfectly appropriate. A fat supplement is perfectly appropriate because we're missing some of the essential fats because of food processing. That's what Healthy for Life does. They provide some of those things. So what should we be doing? Well, if our dream is to live a full, productive, and energetic life with sharp mental acuity, no chronic aches and pains, no chronic medical condition requiring dozens of pills and interminable doctor's appointments, go back to nature. Go back to nature. Brian, what time is it? 6:40. Are you all still with me? Because I got to go on a shopping spree, but I got about 5 minutes of slides left. Okay. All right. The solution. Woohoo! All right. Vegetables. Remember when your grandma told you, eat all your vegetables? Grandma's smarter than our entire medical system. Okay? Remember when grandma said, don't eat that cookie now, you'll spoil your meal? Grandma was smarter than our entire medical system. Vegetables. You cannot eat too many vegetables unless you're eating potatoes and corn. Then you can eat too many, which should be 0. They're just starch and sugar. 7 to 9 servings a day, and you want a wide variety of colors. And you want at least 2 servings of greens a day. So greens are spinach, Swiss chard, kale, beet greens, radish greens, dandelion greens. You can eat the green top of anything. Don't eat rhubarb greens. They'll kill you. All right? Intensely colored. The more intensely the colored, the more intense the color, the more nutrients it has. And these are called phytonutrients. Phytonutrients are incredibly important for our health. Corn and beans don't count, or potatoes and corn don't count. Peas, they're okay. They're on the borderline.
How about sweet potatoes?
Sweet potatoes are okay. And the reason sweet potatoes are okay is they come with fiber, they come with beta carotene and other nutrients. So I'm fine. I love sweet potatoes. But here's the key on sweet potatoes. The longer you cook them, the more sugar comes out in the sweet potato. So if you cook a sweet potato to its ooey gooey, you're going to get a huge load of sugar. If you eat a sweet potato slightly firm, much less sugar that's going to come out.
How about asparagus?
Great. I had asparagus this morning for breakfast. Every morning I have a green and 1 or 2 other vegetables, 2 eggs, and a piece of meat. I got great fat, great protein, and I have no carbs or sugar. A little carb in the greens, but not much. Fruits. Fruits are perfectly healthy. Now, we don't want to consume massive quantities. Berries are the best from a nutritional standpoint and a sugar standpoint, but you want to, 1, 2, 3 servings of fruit a day. Perfectly healthy. Meat. So if you want to be a vegan or vegetarian, great. I respect that. I am not. I think there's lots of value in meat, particularly well-sourced meat from pasture-raised sources. So if we want to eat meat, don't go to Hy-Vee and buy the 99-cent per pound hamburger. Not good. You really need to find a pasture-raised source. Hormone-free, antibiotic-free. There was a study done in, I can't remember which journal. They looked at milk, and they tested for hormonally active chemicals in milk, and they found over 60 hormonally active chemicals in processed commercial milk. Well, the same things in our meat. So we've got to find organic, pasture-raised, antibiotic-free, hormone-free meat. 70% of all the antibiotics produced in this country are fed to animals. Yeah. Fish. Fish is okay. You know, we're not like the mecca for fish around here. So this time of year, it's really hard to get good wild-caught fish, but a serving of fish a week is perfectly healthy.
So the farm raised is...
No farm raised. We've done the exact same thing to fish that we did to cattle. We feed them these lousy grains. They get fat, which is not good fat, and they're sick. We raise them in this cesspool. You know, they're in this big netting. It's a cesspool. Don't buy farm-raised fish. And it's inhumane. Yes?
The Raccoon River wouldn't be good.
You know what? If you're into 3-headed fish, have at it. Yeah. You know, if you love nitrates, I suppose that's okay. Eggs. So we have this love-hate relationship with eggs. Eggs are bad, too much cholesterol. Eggs are good. I am here to tell you eggs are one of the most perfect foods out there, as long as it comes from a pasture-raised source and not these little hens that are cooped up in a one-by-one thing eating sugar water. Okay? Eggs supply us with protein, 6 grams of protein per egg. Eggs supply us with essential fats. Eggs provide us with vitamin D. Eggs provide us with beta-carotene. Eggs provide us with vitamin K. Eggs. I eat eggs every day. My wife and I go through 2 dozen eggs a week. We love eggs. Yes.
Okay, so
And they're cheap.
this came out with no more than 4 eggs a day. I mean, we,
Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. What we've done in food is what happens if we eat more than 4 eggs a week? Nobody knows. Eggs are healthy. Yeah, eggs are healthy.
more of a plant-based diet, but limit your eggs.
I agree with a plant-based diet. If I've had a food pyramid, vegetables are on the bottom. But you know what's right above it? Meat and eggs and nuts.
Where do you get your eggs? I mean, I take it you don't go to Hy-Vee.
I don't go to so I get them at the Iowa Food Co-op. Okay, you can order eggs online. I know farmers that supply me eggs. In the summer, I go to the farmers markets and buy eggs. If you go to Gateway, there's local egg producers. You can just buy them out of this case at Gateway. I would be careful with Whole Foods. They've had a bit of a problem with their eggs in that they're not advertised as such. So,
Thank you, I've got to go.
oh, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, I'll talk to you.
Fat.
Don't get them from the grocery store.
Don't get, well, no, I don't. There's so many sources around. Iowa Food Co-op is a wonderful, wonderful resource for people. IowaFoodCoop.com. You can order online. There's multiple pickups that you can do, and they have a wonderful supplier of fresh food locally grown in Iowa. Somebody said Natural Grocers. That's one of my other favorite places. Natural Grocers has a great nut selection.
Great prices too.
Yeah.
so, correct?
Yeah.
I was going to say the food co-op, which we are members of and
Yep.
love buying from there, has the best salmon that you can get because it is not farmed. It is fresh out of the ocean, frozen one time, sent back to
Do
us.
they use Popsy?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's 2 places. Popsy Fish Company, they're a local company that they work out of Alaska. And then Wallace Farms. Nick Wallace is a farmer in Keystone, Iowa. Nick raises pasture-raised beef. He also has a supplier he works with up in Alaska, and he has frozen salmon, and it's wonderful. He also has frozen, fresh-caught shrimp from the Gulf. Now, you have to remember in shrimp, 90% plus of shrimp is farmed. Most of it comes from Southeast Asia, and it's not very good. So we have to be careful of shrimp sourcing.
What did you say? I didn't hear her source that she said was.
So Iowa Food Co-op, you can get Popsy Fish Company. It's a local company that has wild Alaskan salmon. It's fresh frozen on the boat up there, actually. So.
Does it matter what kind of eggs, how you fix them, scrambled? Or
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Probably to preserve the nutrients the best is to poach them. Frying them is probably next best. Scrambling them is probably least best. I can't give you a percentage of what's destroyed and what's not in each thing. What I do is I cook vegetables in a pan, and then I just throw my eggs in and cook them with my vegetables. It's easy.
if you come over tomorrow?
You know, what time do you want to come over? I'll cook breakfast for anybody. It's my favorite meal of the day. How about what?
Deer, they're all eating out in the fields.
Deer? Yeah, deer. Wild game is terrific. Wild game is terrific. Yeah. Go out. Hard-boiled eggs are great. Hard-boiled eggs make a really great snack. They're easy to transport. They're healthy. So you can send your kids to school with a sugary bar, or you can send them with a hard-boiled egg. I'd send them with a hard-boiled egg. I'm not going to get into fats. Fats is, I know a little bit about fats, not like Dr. Peskin. So what I want to say, though, is cook with saturated fats. Cook with butter. Cook with ghee, which is clarified butter. Cook with coconut oil. Cook with lard or tallow. Do not cook with vegetable oils, because as you heat that oil, not that it's not already destroyed, but it's going to get destroyed even more. Do not cook with vegetable oils. If you want to cook with olive oil, you have to use a low heat because, again, as you heat that above 300 degrees, you're going to destroy the quality and the characteristics of the oil. So cook with fat, saturated fat. Saturated fats are typically hard at room temperatures.
How about avocado oil?
Avocado oil is fine, and the reason avocado oil is fine, it has a very high smoke point and you don't destroy the oil. So, but it's kind of expensive. Yeah. Okay, so a bit of the solution. Now, my favorite part, we're going to go shopping. And I usually have a stand here, but I'll deal with it. So we're going to start with breakfast, okay? As a kid, I used to love Fruity Pebbles. But you know what? I've grown up now, sort of, and I really need to go to an adult cereal. So I get the Cascadia Fruit and Nut Granola, organic, whole grain, 9 grams of sugar per serving in this, 17 grams of sugar in that. This has twice as much sugar as this. And guess what? The serving size of this is bigger than the serving size of that. So it's even more magnified. Don't be fooled by labeling. Look at the ingredients. And the number one ingredient to look at is sugar. Yeah. 17 grams. That's astounding. Do you realize that 17 grams of sugar is 3/4 of your daily intake in a bowl of cereal? Okay, but who's going to eat a bowl of dry cereal? Nobody. What are we going to do? I'm going to wash it down with an orange juice, right? So that's an orange juice. It's a little bit big. It's 15 ounces. Maybe you drink the whole thing. Maybe you don't. Let's say you drink the whole thing. 45 grams of sugar. Okay, so people are going to say, but it's natural. I don't care. It's still just sugar. But let's think about it quantitatively. If you eat an orange, you're going to get full on one orange, right? How many oranges do you think it takes to make that bottle of juice? 6, 7, 8? So now you've taken the sugar of 6 or 7 oranges, you've concentrated into a liquid which we know is not satiating, and you drink it. What happens to all that sugar? Well, the glucose is distributed throughout your body. You're going to burn most of it, but you're going to store some of it. Unfortunately, the fructose all goes to your liver. So if you're eating an orange and the fructose in an orange goes to your liver, it's as if your liver is sipping that fructose with a little tiny cocktail straw. Okay, this is my analogy. If I drink this juice, your liver is going to get a load of fructose as if somebody hooked a fire hose up to it and gave it to your liver. And what happens is the majority, a lot of this is then processed and made into fat. Makes no difference. Makes no difference. You're still squeezing oranges, you're still squeezing the juice, and all you're doing is drinking a big load of sugar.
So what about smoothies then?
If you're making smoothies, do not use juice in your smoothies. Use water, use ice cubes, use full-fat yogurt. Do not use juice, because all you're doing is adding more sugar to it.
You can use fruit.
Fruit, yep, you can. Absolutely. Okay, so the TV commercials show these little French dudes eating Yoplait yogurt, and they're living to be 110. So I better have yogurt, right? 26 grams of sugar. Now, some of that sugar is milk sugar, but most of it is added sugar. Milk sugar is fine for you, not a big metabolic problem. But they don't tell you how much is which. But I can guarantee you that at least 15 grams of this is added sugar.
Are you looking at the carbs or the sugar?
I'm looking at the sugar.
Okay.
I'm looking at the sugar. So I've had what we would consider, quote, a healthy breakfast, right? I had whole grain granola, I had an orange juice, and I had a yogurt. I had 18 teaspoons of sugar, 3 times my daily allotment of sugar in one meal.
What about tomato juice?
Got some sugar in it, not nearly as much as a fruit juice. Watch for additives.
You said you eat meat at breakfast. What do you eat for your meat at breakfast? Warm out little sizzlers?
Nope. If I cook meat the night before, my wife and I always cook enough to have leftovers the next day. So this morning it was a little piece of pork chop, could be a little piece of hamburger, could be a little piece of fish, could be a little piece of chicken, whatever's left over. It's not sausage and bacon. Now, I will have a sausage or bacon treat once or twice a month, but like 1 or 2 links, 1 or 2 pieces. But no, I just cook more meat the night before. And I don't eat 6 ounces of meat. I eat a little 2-ounce piece of meat. So 2 ounces of meat. So if you look at protein content, 2 ounces of meat is going to have roughly about 15 grams of protein. Slap 2 eggs on that, that's another 12 grams of protein. Put some vegetables in there, there might be a gram or 2. So I'm at about 30 grams of protein for my breakfast. And that's a really good way to start your day. It helps satiate your appetite for hours on end. We get good fats with it, so we get some saturated fat in our meats. We get some omega-3s in our meats. We get good nutrients out of our vegetables and, of course, our eggs. And guess what? My insulin doesn't go up. Therefore, I'm not hungry in 2 hours. So 18 teaspoons of sugar at breakfast. What happens 2 hours later after that breakfast? You're hungry again, right? The more you eat, the more you want. So, this is a funny story about this. So I went to the store and bought a Zone bar. Well, I store this bag in my basement. Well, I had a little mouse problem this year in the basement. And look what the mice liked. They liked the Zone bar. You know why they liked the Zone bar? Because it had 4 teaspoons of sugar in it. They love the Zone bar. They would have drinking some of this other stuff, but they can't chew through the plastic. But what really intrigued me about this, and what this says about our processed food industry, is that Zone bar has 49 ingredients. Do you really think it takes 49 ingredients to make a bar? I can make a bar with 4 ingredients. Don't know, but there's another 4 teaspoons of sugar.
Do you eat any yogurt?
I do. I only buy yogurt that's full fat. I only buy yogurt from a pasture-raised source, and my favorite yogurt is from Radiant Farms down in Fairfield, Iowa, which you can buy at the Iowa Food Co-op. How about that? Okay, so it's time for lunch.
So do you just add fruit to it? I have a problem with the unsweetened yogurt.
Yeah, what I do is I cut up strawberries, I cut up apples, I cut up blueberries, and I slap some yogurt in with it and eat them. And I tell you, I can eat plain yogurt just out of the can if I want to. You'll get used to it. You will.
So you did do bacon at breakfast. Talk about that.
Bacon. So I buy my bacon from Wallace Farms, as where I buy all of my meat. Wallace Farms has 2 types of bacon. They have sugar uncured bacon, and then just uncured bacon. I buy the kind that doesn't have sugar. So lunch, I'm in a hurry. I'm going to have a can of soup. Progresso creamy tomato with bacon and cheese. Now that can, they say, is 2 servings. I'm going to eat the whole thing. There's no way. So if I eat the whole thing, I'm going to get 6 teaspoons of sugar out of that. 6 teaspoons of sugar, 1 day's worth of sugar in a can of soup. I mean, this is absurd. So, being the health-conscious dude that I am, I'm going to wash it down with a naked juice. And this is green. Green is good, right? Okay. It's got spinach, kiwi, broccoli, apples, banana, and it's also got 53 grams of sugar. Yeah. This is just sugar that's been squeezed from plants. It's advertised, well, it's natural, it's okay. No, it's not okay. It's just sugar. It's just sugar. Now for dinner. So I like ribs. I like back ribs. But what do you put on ribs? Barbecue sauce. So this is a real killer. This is a killer for people. 2 tablespoons of barbecue sauce, which is 1 serving, has 4 teaspoons of sugar in it. 3/4 of a day worth of 2/3 of a day worth of sugar in 2 teaspoons of barbecue sauce. Be careful of condiments. They are all loaded with sugar. Salad dressings, condiments like this, the only things that I can say are not, I've not seen mustard with sugar in it. Okay?
I found a ketchup at Natural Grocers that doesn't have sugar.
Really? I found them with 2 grams and not 4, but I don't eat ketchup much. So anyway, I'm probably going to use 4 teaspoons of barbecue sauce. You know, we love barbecue sauce. That's 8 teaspoons of sugar. That's an enormous amount of sugar. So we have ribs. And what do we have with ribs? Baked beans. Huh? Baked beans. Now, this thing tells me that there's 5 servings of baked beans in there. I don't see that. Do you see that? 5 servings? I'm going to probably eat half that can. But I'll tell you how many grams of sugar, or how much sugar is in 1 serving. How many teaspoons of sugar do you think is in 1 serving of these beans?
6.
Close. 5 teaspoons in 1 serving. If I eat this whole can, that's 25 teaspoons of sugar. That's 4 days. That's 4 days worth of sugar. It doesn't seem possible.
It doesn't.
No, but it is. It's right there on the label.
Oh, no, I believe you.
21 grams. You see it?
You sold me out.
I'm not making this stuff up. You know what? Reality's goofier than fiction.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, what am I going to wash it down with? Mountain Dew. This is my favorite. Anybody want to guess how much sugar's in one of those? How many teaspoons?
17.
You're close. 19 teaspoons of sugar. 19 teaspoons of sugar in a Mountain Dew. So, I've gone through the day. I've had no desserts, right? Unless you consider the Zone Bar dessert, which I would. Unless I consider the cereal dessert, which I would. But in our reality, we've had no desserts. We've had no real sweet treats. And we've consumed almost 70 teaspoons of sugar. And we wonder why we're in trouble. Sugar, there are 600,000 plus processed foods in our grocery stores. More than 80% of them have added sugar. Here's the problem. If you read a label, you may not know it's sugar because the sugar industry has 56 different names for sugar, at least. There may be more by now. So my favorite one is natural fruit juice concentrate. People look at the label and go, oh, this is fruit. No, it's sugar. So we're deceived. Marketing, it's deceit. We are deceived by the food industry. Do you know what's in Mountain Dew? There's some brominated chemical in Mountain Dew. It's the same thing they use as a flame retardant. Do you really want to drink this stuff? No. No. So that's our tale of sugar.
Doctor,
Oh, yeah.
question on, when you showed the can of beans, question on dry beans.
Oh, dry beans are fine. So when we say sugar in that, that's not the little bit of sugar that's in a bean. That's sugar that's added because they're putting maple syrup and brown sugar and whatever else they put in there.
Right, but dry beans are okay.
So yeah, I mean, I go back to beans. We talked about grains, and you know, if we want to cut down on our carbs, we can't eat a bunch of grains. It's the same thing for beans. So you want to be really particular about your beans. So like white beans, or Great Northern beans, lima beans, those are just starch festivals. If you really want to eat beans, go to your lentils. Lentils are higher in protein, lower in carbs, and higher in fiber. So lentils are good. Adzuki beans, they're a little hard to find, but those are okay. But our standard kidney beans, they're just loads of starch. Fair. I'd still go with lentils. What's that? Oh, yeah, they're just white starch. Yeah.
So Andy, you mentioned glyphosate.
Roundup.
So Bayer's been running full-page ads in the paper saying glyphosate is okay.
Yeah.
Tell us what you know about glyphosate.
So there's an inverse correlation between the number of ads that are run claiming something is safe and its actual safety. There is. So what do we know about glyphosate? Glyphosate has been now labeled by the World Health Organization as a probable carcinogen. Glyphosate is dangerous. Glyphosate should not be part of our food system, and you can get it out of your life by buying non-GMO products, which by label are not sprayed with all these by organic non-GMO grains. Organic means they have not been sprayed with pesticides. Glyphosate's dangerous. Yeah. There's an inverse correlation. The more a pharmaceutical advertises in the paper, the worse it is. Yeah. I mean, they're going to, you know, there's,
Vaping things,
what's that?
the Juul, if that's what you call it, the vaping things, they just started running full.
Oh, yeah, we're not going to get into vaping. But I can tell you these Juul products are delivering anywhere from 4 to 10 times the nicotine of a cigarette. And now we are addicting our young people to nicotine, and they will eventually probably go to cigarettes. We don't know that yet, but that's my thought. Somebody had a question over here.
Yeah. Sugar, when you go to look at it, is it 4 grams or 5 grams per teaspoon?
So 1 teaspoon is 4 grams of sugar.
4 grams.
Mhm.
Okay. And then also, palm kernel oil, I noticed that they're starting to put that in everything.
Yeah, so here's the problem with palm oil. Number one, it's highly processed. Number two, it is the number one reason for deforestation in the world. So do not buy palm oil. And if it's maybe not for its health risks, but for the fact that it's causing more deforestation in Southeast Asia than any other reason in the world. So no palm oil. You know why they're using it? It's cheap. It's cheap. Yeah. Yeah. So when you buy an oil, olive oil is fine, extra virgin, cold processed oil. Right, right. Our food system is loaded with sugar, refined carbs, and processed oils, all three of which are detrimental to our health.
How about cooking with peanut oil?
No peanut oil. Highly processed. So any oil that comes from a vegetable is highly processed. Vegetable oils are what we have now all oils have saturated, polyunsaturated, and monounsaturated fats. Vegetable oils are particularly high in polyunsaturated fats. And what that means is there are these long chains of carbon atoms, and they have two what we call double bonds, and they have these little, they're kind of bent. Polyunsaturated fats are unstable at heat, meaning they grab an oxygen atom and they become oxidized. Oxidized oils are bad for us. So when they process any of these vegetable oils, what happens is they have to heat the product to get the oil out. When they heat it, they destroy the oil. They then have to deodorize the oil because it stinks. It's rancid because of the heating. The deodorization process requires more heating. After you deodorize the oil, you end up with this gray sludge. So what do you do with that? You then have to clarify the oil. So you put it through another heating process that oxidizes and destroys the oil even more to make it clear. So you'll buy it. Do not buy vegetable oils.
Canola oil?
No, no, no. So the canola industry has done a really great job at marketing. So if you go to the American Heart Association website, they recommend canola oil. Guess who's one of the biggest sponsors of the American Heart Association? The canola oil industry. No vegetable oils. Just anything the vegetable, get it out of your system.
So for baking a cake, use butter instead of
Yes,
oil?
use butter. Use grass-fed, pasture-raised butter. Kerrygold, you can buy it at Trader Joe's, you can buy it at Costco. That's pasture-raised butter from Ireland. Yes, sir. Have at it. Yep. So pasteurization is a process of heating. The reason we pasteurize dairy is to kill bacteria. It does alter the chemical profile of the fat in milk, and it does decrease the nutrient value. Problem is we cannot trade and sell raw milk here in Iowa. It's illegal. It's not in California, but it's illegal here.
Well, what about the powdered vegetable greens you can buy in Canada?
What about what?
Well, powdered vegetable greens.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we like to sell these powdered things because they're a substitute. I cannot, that's what they say. I still go back, and you know what, without seeing it, it's hard for me to compare, but I will tell you this. Anytime we process something, we're losing something in the process. The best thing to do is eat the fruit or vegetable closest to the source of production. That's just, we want convenience. You know what? If somebody has to use a powdered vegetable because of convenience, it's better than no vegetable, but it's not as good as the source. Sir. Hang on, he had his hand up. One quick.
And do you have any testimonies of people who have really made a switch due to health and have seen some results on it? Or?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you, lots of people, I gave up sugar. I feel so much better. I've lost 20 pounds. I don't have the cravings I used to. So yeah, tons. So somebody had a question here about, yeah, so be careful when you're buying almond and coconut milk in the stores. Look at the ingredients. Lots of them have sugar. You can make almond milk really easily if you want to take the time. Go buy fresh raw almonds, soak them overnight in water. That gets rid of some of the plant lectins and phytates. Then take those almonds, put them in a Vitamix or some type of blender, put a couple cups of water in, blend it up, and then filter that through a cheesecloth. And you got almond milk. If you want to sweeten it just a touch, add a little maple syrup. If you don't, have at it. But the problem in the store is we're adding sugar and other ingredients to these natural milks.
What about honey, like raw? Not that you buy, but people that...
Honey is sugar. It has a few vitamins and minerals in it, but it's no different than, from a metabolic standpoint, it's no different than table sugar. My favorite sweetener, if you're going to have to sweeten, is maple syrup. Why maple syrup? Because it has less fructose and more glucose. So honey is 50-50 roughly. Maple syrup is 35% fructose, 65% glucose. But we have to wean ourselves from the sweets. We have to wean ourselves. And I really hate saying, substitute this for that, do this for that. It's really get it out of your diet, get it out of your system. As you get sugar out of your system, you will adapt to the less sweet taste. And in fact, if somebody gave me a soda today, I'd probably spit it out. It tastes incredibly sweet. So it's a process. You're not turning on a light switch here, it's a process. And I want everybody to understand that it's a maybe slow process, but as you do it, you will adapt to less sweet, you will want less sweet, you will crave less sweet, and you'll just continue down that pathway.
Do you take vitamins too?
I do not, and that's a whole nother, I take a mineral supplement, and I take a fatty acid supplement, and that's it. Because I eat 7 to 10 servings of vegetables every day. I include leafy greens at least twice a day, and I eat a wide variety. I mean, my wife and I spend a lot of time chopping vegetables. I eat raw vegetables, I eat cooked vegetables, I eat a complete variety of vegetables. So.
You have a straightforward, very easy way to test the hormones that you talked about?
So if you go into your doctor, you're not going to test leptin or things, but I would ask for a fasting insulin, which almost nobody will do. They say, oh, there's too much variability. Oh, baloney. Get a fasting insulin. Get a fasting blood glucose. Get a hemoglobin A1C. So remember we talked about the Maillard reaction, the binding of sugar molecules to protein. That's what hemoglobin A1C is. It's the binding of sugar to molecules in red blood cells. So that's an indication of abnormal blood sugars over about a 6-week period. So what it's measuring is how abnormal is your blood sugar over a period of time.
If I wanted to fry some fish, which you probably don't like, but can you use the lard or the coconut oil? You can, because you can go to 350 with those, can't you?
Absolutely. The saturated fats are the best for cooking.
So you use lard or coconut, either one?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Go ahead.
What do you think about coconut sugar or erythritol?
So coconut sugar is sugar. We use it a little bit. We haven't used it much lately. We use a little more maple syrup. Erythritol is a sugar alcohol. So what they've done is added a carbon and a hydrogen and an oxygen atom. I hate the taste of erythritol. Erythritol does the same thing that these non-caloric artificial sweeteners do. And actually, erythritol is not 0 calories. There's actually a calorie or two associated with erythritol. So again, it falls under the non-caloric artificial sweeteners, and I would discourage it.
I had a great spot of erythritol the other day.
So where is erythritol? It's in chewing gum. Lots of chewing gum uses erythritol.
Anything in an OL?
It's a sugar alcohol. Yeah. Yes?
Grapeseed oil, like cold pressed grapeseed oil, or?
That's okay. So canola oil is grapeseed oil, or that's rapeseed. Did you say grape or rape?
Grape.
It's okay. Yeah.
What about, like pasture-raised organic, leaf lard?
What kind of lard?
From pork.
Oh, that's okay.
Made ourselves.
Yeah, tallow.
Organic.
Mhm.
Pasture-raised.
Yep.
That's okay.
That's okay. One of the arguments against using animal oils for cooking is the fact that animals accumulate lots of environmental toxins, so lead and things like that. So we do have to be a bit cognizant, but I don't think we're getting lead poisoning or mercury poisoning from eating a little bit of animal products. That's one argument you'll hear about, oh, it's better to be a vegan. Problem is, plants are taking up that same material too. Yes?
What about the monk fruit sweetener?
Ooh, I don't know about monk fruit sweetener. If it's from a fruit, it's probably loaded with fructose. So remember remember a few years ago, agave was really popular? Agave is 75% fructose. It's worse than anything else. I don't know the chemical composition of monk fruit, but I'm sure it's sugar. Yes?
So the farm that you talked about was Wallace.
Wallace,
They have a website.
it's wallacefarms.com.
Okay, and I just wanted to say again for the food co-op,
Yep.
you can go on their website, Iowa Food Co-op, and you can get a 6-month free membership to try it out and see if you like it. Then it costs like $50-some to join and $10 a year after that.
Yeah, it's you know what? I can buy fresh greens, vegetables all year round because we have lots of farmers growing in greenhouses. They not only have fruits and vegetables, they have dairy, they have meat, they have all kinds of other products like honey and maple syrup and lots of different things. It's really a tremendous resource. And if we don't support those resources, those farmers go away. And we don't want that to happen.
So how do they ship it to you? Or?
No. So you order it online, and every other week there's a pickup. So they have I pick up over by Franklin Library. There's a pickup in Newton. There's a pickup in Indianola. There's multiple pickup sites throughout. Yeah, there's multiple sites throughout the metro. Yep. Yes.
What about cooking with cold pressed peanut oil?
Okay. So that's okay because it hasn't been heated. Now, I have there's a little problem with peanuts. A lot of peanuts are contaminated with something called aflatoxin, and so I'm a little leery of peanuts. I don't use a lot of peanuts myself.
If they were organic, would that matter?
Not necessarily, because the aflatoxin is how they're stored. So it's a fungus that gets into peanuts when they're stored. So even if they're organic, you don't know how they've been stored. So I minimize my use of peanuts. I love peanut butter, so I do eat peanut butter. But
If you were like stir-frying Chinese food,
a little peanut, that's fine. Yeah, I would use sesame oil. Sesame. Mm-hmm. Yep. I'd use a little. I make my own. Yeah. Nut butters are really easy to make. So all you do is go buy your nuts at the store, almonds, cashew butter, whatever you want to make. And I soak the nuts overnight to get rid of some of the phytates and lectins, which inhibit.
Natural cashews or whatever.
Yeah, so I buy mine at Natural Grocers. They have a tremendous selection of nuts. They have lots of organic nuts, so I buy organic nuts. Soak them overnight, and then if you want to, you can roast them. Now, roasting alters some of the oils in them, but it gives a little better taste. You roast them in the oven, 200-degree oven, 30 minutes on a roasting pan. That's it. And then put them in a Vitamix or a food processor, push the button, let it go for about 5 minutes, and you got nut butter. It's that easy. Don't add palm oil, don't add honey, don't add sugar, add a little salt if you want. But that's the easy way to make nut butter. And frankly, it's a lot cheaper than buying the already made nut butters.
So you shop at Trader Joe's?
A little bit, yeah. Let me think what we buy. We buy butter at Trader Joe's because that's the cheapest place we can find butter. We'll buy some organic produce at Trader Joe's, and that's about it. So we shop at Iowa Food Co-op, number 1. Between May and October, I almost never set foot in a store because we go to the farmers markets. We go to natural grocers. We go to Gateway quite a bit. Gateway has a nice organic produce section.
Where do you
And
buy your milk?
I don't drink milk.
You don't drink milk?
No. Why would I drink milk? So that's a really great question, because what have we been taught in our country? Milk is essential for life, right? That's complete nonsense. Guess what? There is no correlation between calcium intake and risk of fractures. In fact, Swedish studies have shown that the higher the calcium intake, the higher the risk of women getting fractures. We have been led to believe that you have to have calcium to prevent fractures. What you really need to prevent fractures is protein, because your bones are composed of this real hard outer layer, and then they're composed of this inner lattice work we call trabecula. Protein is essential at making that trabecula. So if you don't have protein, you're not making that trabecula. Where do we get calcium from? We get calcium from some meat, particularly salmon and sardines. We get calcium from leafy green vegetables. You can get plenty of calcium in your diet without guzzling 3 bottles of milk a day. Now, that's not what the advertisements say, is it? But guess what's one of the most heavily subsidized industries in the country? Dairy. Dairy. Yeah.
So what would be your best advice to a sugarholic to get off sugar?
Okay, where does your sugar come from? What are you drinking? Number 1, what are you drinking?
Well, I've been off pop for a week.
Okay. Excellent start. Give her a hand. Yeah.
The other one is probably the little candy jar that sits in the office.
Okay.
And it's not at my desk.
Okay, so this gets to the idea of food environments. And if you really want to change, you have to change your food environment. So if your home, if your kitchen has a cupboard and it's got potato chips, Twinkies, and candy bars, even if you have a refrigerator that's loaded with fresh vegetables, guess what you're going to eat? That. But look at your environment at work. There's a candy jar. What's going to happen during the day? You're going to go to the candy jar. You have to. It's just like, I liken this to smoking. If you want to quit smoking, you got to get all tobacco products out of your house, right? If you want to get off of sugar, you have to get all sugar out of your house. You cannot have it there. It's too tempting. It's too addicting. So beverages are number 1. Anybody go to Dunkin' Donuts here? And I won't admonish you if you do. They supposedly have good coffee. Is that true? Good coffee? Okay, I don't drink coffee. So Dunkin' Donuts has a drink called a coffee caramel culotta. 20-ounce drink, 920 calories, 34 teaspoons of sugar. Yeah. Watch your drinks. So if you want to change, what I do is I've actually gone into people's homes and I've ripped stuff out of their kitchen. Our kitchen should have 1 cupboard for spices, maybe an oil or 2 that isn't in the fridge, and maybe nuts. But nuts are best stored in the freezer. They last longer. And we should have 2 refrigerators, because everything we eat should spoil. Right? That's the rule. Everything we eat should spoil. 2 fridges, 1 cupboard. Now, as far as getting off sugar, it's going to take environment change. You can't have it sitting around. If you do, it's not going to work. You have to be very conscious of what's going in, and you have to read every label. Every label. If it's got, and if you go back to Michael Pollan, if it's got more than 5 ingredients, don't eat it. If you can't pronounce any of the ingredients, don't eat it. If it has ingredients that your mother or grandmother wouldn't recognize, don't eat it. So, what do you do to satisfy cravings? Do you like chocolate? You said you like chocolate. No. Okay, I just equated candy and chocolate. In my mind, candy equals chocolate.
I don't eat chocolate, I barely eat chips.
Okay.
So tell us anything about chocolate.
You know, chocolate's an interesting topic, and it's gotten... chocolate in and of itself actually has many health benefits. It's got very powerful flavonoids. It's got a lot of fiber, believe it or not. It's got good saturated fats. The problem with most chocolate research, it's been funded by the chocolate industry. Therefore, it's invalid. That being said, I think a little piece of chocolate, that's how I satisfy my dessert. I have a small little piece of chocolate, about like that, after dinner. 85% chocolate or more. So milk chocolate is sugar with a little chocolate flavoring. Bittersweet chocolate that you cook with is really 100% cacao. 85% is really pushing the edge of how bitter it is. But after time, you get used to it. It actually, when you go back to a milk chocolate bar, you go, oh my, what is this? This is horrible. So it actually tastes like chocolate. So if you want a little piece of chocolate to satisfy that dessert craving or even that sweet craving, start out with 50%, go to 70%, and try and get above 80%. You have a question in the back.
Yeah, so I love toast in the morning, and I have children who like to have sandwiches at lunch. And I have sort of switched to sprouted bread.
Ooh, okay.
And, you know, we'll do like almond butter
Mhm.
and some on the sandwiches, and I like toast with butter. What do you think of sprouted bread? I mean, I need
So sprouted bread is still carbs, but it has more nutrients. Whenever you sprout a grain or a bean, you are actually improving the nutrient value of that. More B vitamins, more vitamin C. So from a nutrient standpoint, it's improved. It's still carbs, it's still being processed the same. My wife and I do eat toast, but we make our own bread, and it's called, we used to call it adventure bread, it's now called wander bread. I'm not sure why. We switched the name, but it's all nuts and seeds. So the bread we make is composed of hemp seeds, chia seeds, sesame seeds, flaxseed, walnuts, pecans, olive oil, water, a little bit of maple syrup, and there is a little bit of oats in it to help bind it together. No egg. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out if people want that recipe. I should have brought it, but I didn't. Yeah. Where's Tim? Where's Tim when you need him? Hey, Tim. Can you post it? I will give it to Brian, and they can post it on Healthy for Life. It is wonderful. So one slice of bread it's calorie dense, but don't worry about that because we're not counting calories here. It's got 250 calories in a slice. You make it in a 9 by whatever loaf pan, slice it up, 18 slices, 250 calories, 18 grams of fat, 7 grams of protein, 7 grams of fiber, and like 12 grams of carbs. So it's high fiber, high fat, high protein, low carb. It's wonderful. Huh? We buy them at natural grocers. And then we smoke them on the side. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Question for you. We have bought Montana Gold organic wheat, grind it ourselves and make our own bread.
Uh-huh.
Is organic been abused? In other words, is that sprayed with Roundup then?
No, if it's labeled organic, by law, it cannot have been sprayed. Okay. Now, does that mean they didn't get drift from another field? No, but it hasn't been sprayed.
Could you talk a little bit more about sugar and dementia?
Oh, absolutely. So there is no question. So we are now even considering labeling dementia as type 3 diabetes. Mm-hmm. So if you hear the term type 3 diabetes, that means dementia. We know there was a study done at the University of Washington about 4 years ago, and they followed 6,700 people for almost 9 years, and they looked at blood sugars. And what they found was there was a linear correlation between level of blood sugar and risk of dementia. And it was linear, meaning there was no threshold. The higher your blood sugar, the higher your risk of dementia. even in people with normal, what we call, quote, normal blood sugars. So people who had a blood sugar of 99, which is in our normal range, had a higher risk of dementia than if your fasting blood sugar was 70. So there's absolute correlation with dementia. And we're seeing this horrible epidemic of dementia. And you can label it as Alzheimer's, you can label it as Lewy body, you can label it as vascular. To me, it makes no difference. We have no treatment for it. We're going to give you a couple pills, Numenda and Aricept. They don't work, but we got to do something, right? So if you're interested in dementia, Dr. Breedenson, he wrote a book, How to Reverse Alzheimer's. Breedenson? Bredesen. That's it, sorry. I have not personally read the book, but he wrote How to Reverse Alzheimer's. If you just Google How to Reverse Alzheimer's, I'm sure his book will come up. Yes, sir.
Are you saying that the sugar that comes naturally in a fruit is metabolically just as bad as
No.
Added sugar?
Nope.
Okay, I drink some cherry juice that was recommended by a Dr. Asa, who is a nutritional doctor on the radio. And it's got like about 20 grams, but it says
But it's a juice.
Yeah, but absolutely zero added sugar.
Makes no difference. You have taken all the sugar from these cherries and you've concentrated into a glass of juice.
Okay,
Eat the
that's when it becomes bad. When you
Yeah,
take the juice out.
yeah. Eat the cherries. Get the fiber from the cherries, get the other phytonutrients from the cherries, eat the whole cherry. Yep. Anytime you juice something, you're just concentrating sugar. Yes? Oh, bananas have gotten lots of bad raps. I mean, tropical fruits have higher sugar contents. I'm okay with the banana. I would not make bananas my staple, but if you say, geez, I'm going to throw a banana in with my smoothie once in a while, go ahead. Okay, bananas have something called inulin. So inulin is a non-digestible carbohydrate, and we know inulin is actually good for our gut bacteria. So it's an okay source, but a better source are onions and garlic for inulin. What did you say? Do you know how bad microwave popcorn is for you? Oh my gosh. The chemicals that are thrown off from that fake butter are horrible. Do not eat Can you? Okay. If you can, fine. But if it's got butter or fake butter, don't do it. Regular popcorn's great. You know what you want to cook it in? Coconut oil or lard. Yep. Don't cook it in corn oil or canola oil. Cook it in coconut oil.
It's delicious.
Yes.
I have diabetes, and I had my diabetes numbers. My A1C went down to normal, to 5.5 when I juiced. And I was detoxifying before that. And then I did the juice, the vegetable and fruit juices in the morning and
Okay.
in the afternoon, and it went down to normal.
And so what are you doing now?
I need to get a juicer again.
My guess is if you continue that, it won't be normal. But so when you say juice, do you mean juice as in squeeze or smoothies as in grind?
I put them in my juicer that I got.
Mhm.
It sounded like an airplane taking off. But it was really good for me, and I was following this book that I got at Campbell's.
Yeah. So did it squeeze?
Went down to normal after detoxifying.
So when you say detoxifying, what did that mean in your...
Getting rid of all the toxins out of your system first.
How did you do
maybe
that?
3 days, and then doing the vegetables, putting whole vegetables in, and also fruits together.
Okay, but again, did it come out as a clear liquid or did it come out as a slurry slush? I'm trying to distinguish juicing from making a smoothie because there's a huge difference.
It made my numbers come down to normal.
Okay.
Because I remember.
So when you put the stuff in, did you have a blade that spun and ground it up? Oh, then you made a smoothie. That's very different. Because what's happened with a smoothie is you're still...
There's a filter on it, on that juicer.
Okay.
So the stuff went into
When you grind and make a smoothie, you're still getting all the fiber and nutrients that are in that plant. When you juice it, you're not. all you're getting is the liquid sugar and you're throwing the rest away. So there's a distinction that has to be made. They're very different. So, yes?
Are you a cheese eater then?
Rarely.
Really, just, that's not good, or?
Cheese is okay. It's, again, where do you buy your cheese? So cheese that comes in a cellophane package is not cheese. Most of it's lousy oil. So I buy my cheese from, it's where you have to cut it off a wheel that's actually been fermented and aged. And that's perfectly fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Andy,
Oh.
2 more questions. 2 more questions.
2 more.
Yeah.
2 more, then we got to go. Yes?
So when you make smoothies, what is the base for your liquid?
Water. Or if you want them cold, ice cubes. And I'm not I don't make smoothies. I just like the whole plant. But if you make smoothies, don't use juice. Use water or a little bit of ice cubes. Yogurt can also be a base. And then mix it up. There's millions of recipes. But a lot of the recipes are going to put lots of sugar in there when they start using juices and they start using lots of tropical fruits. So lots of them have bananas and mangoes and all those things. Stick with berries. Stick with some vegetable products, kale or spinach. Even put some nuts or nut butter in your smoothies.
Do you cook your kale or can you just eat it straight? I've heard different.
Both. I do it both. So sometimes we'll have kale salad. If we're going to have kale salad, we blanch the kale very quickly, like steam it for a minute, just to make it a little bit more palatable and a little bit easier to digest.
Does it take bitterness out of it a little bit?
Oh, not too much, but it depends on, kale early in the season is less bitter than kale late in the season. If you're going to cook kale and it's still bitter, what we do is we saute onions or leeks, and then we put the kale in with the sauteed onions or leek and add a little bit of balsamic vinegar.
I think you need to offer some cooking classes.
Okay. Well, okay, one more.
For storing food, what are your thoughts on vegetables out of the garden and canning them to keep them rather than freezing?
So in general, I like freezing better than canning. But if it's fresh out of the garden, you're canning in a glass jar, I don't know of any studies that would say one's better than the other. I'm perfectly fine with canning. Yeah. But if you're going to buy vegetables in the winter and they're not fresh, buy frozen. It's actually okay. Most vegetables are actually flash frozen in the field nowadays. And in fact, some people would argue that in the wintertime, we have to truck vegetables from thousands and thousands of miles, that actually buying frozen may be actually more nutritious than those vegetables that have been sitting on a truck for days or weeks. Or buy from the Iowa Food Co-op where you can still get fresh stuff. Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure. I hope you learned something.